Hello and welcome to a new session on the topic iSAQB and Arc42 for architecture, documentation, and communication in the context of enterprise architecture. A disclaimer: any copyrighted material in this video series is only introduced at a very high level and for enterprise architects how to benefit and use them. For any of these materials, please refer to the websites isaqb.org and arc42.org. That being said, we start our session. In today's session, we are showing an example of how to use the Arc42 template in your organization. I will navigate to arc42.org and I will go over to the examples page. On the examples page, I will scroll down and you can see here quite a few sample projects that you can use as a baseline starting point for using the template. Some of them are in German and the others in English. So you can see here the sanity checker project. I will open the page and go over to architecture. And this is a perfect example of the ASCII doc. And you can see how it looks quite neatly and nicely done. You can see the sections that we have discussed in the previous sessions: the constraints, the context, solution strategy, building blocks, runtime view, etc. And you can see how this looks like in a real life scenario. I'll scroll down. You can see here examples of a terminology. What can we go wrong with the HTML files, the motivations, the functionality listed here for brevity with the numbering systems G1, G7. What are the sanity checks if the system is introduced, if the addressing, the quality goals, stakeholders, even the structure of the URLs, code snippets if necessary. If necessary, I would be very careful with code snippets unless necessary. On constraints, you can see here quite bullet points on the constraints on the entire system at hand, subject of interest. The context of the system, you can see here a very high level view of the system context and the interactions with the system and the different components or high level entities in the system. Again, this is an example of how to document it. I'm not going to explain what actually HTML sanity check does. I am even myself not very much aware of this product, but I'm displaying here the documentation and the communication of software architecture using the Arc42 template. You can see here a deployment context where it fits as a deployed artifact. One of the things that I have also learned in my praxis or my practical experience as an enterprise architect is that whenever you have a diagram, always have a table beneath it explaining what each box is. So for example, a command line, you see here an artifact command line as is used to involve the HSC command line interface. You know it, what a command line is. A developer knows it, but not every single stakeholder knows it. Even a developer who joins your team new to be onboarded, he will appreciate when he finds such a comprehensive documentation at hand. And then introducing the solution strategy, how this strategy is based to implement this in Java with minimal external dependency. Apply the template method pattern. One of the interesting design patterns, by the way, the template method makes it very generic, so adaptable to almost every output format, PDF, HTML, etc. I would recommend having a look at this one. I have also had experiences and touched hands with the template method pattern in one of the projects and found it quite insightful. Even if you are not going to implement it 100% in the project, having that in your as a Swiss knife in your architecture toolset is insightful to you, because this will inspire you in the direction of solutions to the new problems that you haven't seen before. You can see here the building blocks view of the system, internal details of the system, again with tabular explanations, interfaces and components of the system at granular fine details level 2, level 3 as well, with here a class diagram showing the datas and fields attributes of these data classes. I would say this is where I wouldn't very much go, where we add code snippets to the system, but if necessary do it. Otherwise keep it minimal, because abstraction is also part of the architecture work. And also this is quite, in the long run, quite annoying, because this will change definitely, and if this changes then you need to revisit your documentation and change it. Unless necessary, add it and make it quite abstract and concrete as much as possible. Sometimes in introducing APIs we need to address that a page should include the title, the file name, and this is to be overseen. Otherwise, if we are not if we are not documenting it properly, so that's where I would say please introduce it in your documentation. In the next part, you can see they haven't listed any runtime views, but this is where the sequence diagrams fit in. Deployment view, again, if this is introduced at a very high level previously, again here it fits nicely with some level of details. You can see bundled as a jar file with CLI jar, etc., the relationship between them, tabular explanation of them. You can see here cross-cutting concepts. You can see it starts here. I would say this is starting with an entity relation diagram. We can see the cardinality of the objects and the relations to the classes. So you can have a resource, could be aggregation of image file, style sheet file. URI is described by a resource, describes a resource, and then this is a specialization of a link target, which is checker uses check target and then checks the HTML page. And for that it has a finding. The finding is item and suggestion. This is a domain model. You can see this is a domain model. Implementation classes, domain concepts, ubiquitous language. We have seen this is a cross-cutting concern. You could say the entity relation diagram fits into one of the building blocks views of your system, but at this stage this is not an entity relation diagram. This is a domain model. It uses the ubiquitous language of the business, the subject matter experts. They will relate, they will know what a checker is, what a finding is. This is the language you are introducing in the new architecture, and this is the language the developers will use when implementing the classes and the data models in the system. And then explanation what each one is. Again, coding structure, directory structures. What else could be as a cross-cutting concern? Maven plugin, concept and deployment. Flexible checking algorithms. Basically everything that didn't fit in previous sections is listed here. Duplication checks, broken cross-references, missing local resource checkers, etc., etc. Reporting as a cross-cutting concern. Copy required resources to output directory, etc. Myself, in cross-cutting concerns in enterprise architecture projects, I would say the regulations, compliance, the backups, disaster recovery, migration, playbacks, logging, tracing, monitoring, everything that is of interest to the stakeholders will be listed here as well. Next is design decisions. The goal of this decision was to allow it to be programmatically done. The decision criteria was that the alternatives, this is a cornerstone of an ADR, architecture decision record. What are alternatives that we have investigated before we make the decision? It could be listed somewhere else and documented in a different documentation. The alternatives evaluation and what are the results, what are the advantages and disadvantages of each alternative. But this is very essential if you are making not a blinded decision. This is where you bring it in and how you should be doing it. Of course, every organization has its own standard process. Finally, goals of this documentation, and I will assume the glossary is being listed or implicitly listed. As you can see, there are so many tables already, making it redundant to introduce a glossary, so everything is almost quite comprehensively explained along the way. That was it, an example of Arc42 for software architecture, documentation, and communication. I hope you find this video insightful and useful and benefit you in your praxis and experiences as an enterprise architect. Thank you and see you in future sessions.